In today's video, we're going to look at ways that we can use mental math to help us when we are subtracting. So these strategies are going to be really similar to what we used yesterday in our mental math addition strategies. So hopefully you'll be able to make that connection of how you used those with addition. It can also be used in subtraction. Our last one might look a little bit different, but they're similar ideas. So our first one that we're going to do is breaking apart the number by tens and ones. And so I would break apart each of these numbers, looking at the groups of 10 and 1. So 66 becomes 60 and 6, and 15 becomes 10 and 5. So I'm then going to take my ones and subtract those. So I know 6 minus 5 is 1. And then I'm going to take my tens and subtract those. So 60 minus 10 is 50. Then I just have to put those back together. So 50 plus 1 is 51. Another way that I could do that with those same numbers is I could break apart just the number I'm subtracting. So I'm starting here with the 66. I'm going to always keep that bigger number the same when I'm using this second break apart strategy, and I'm just going to break apart that number I'm subtracting away from it. So I'd keep 66, and then 15 would again become a 10 and a 5. My 10 looks kind of like a B. And then I'm going to take those parts just one at a time. So I'd take 66 minus 5, which would make 61. So I used my 5. And then I need to take away my 10. So 61 minus 10 equals 51. So both break apart strategies get me to 51. I just have to decide if I want to break apart both numbers to make it easier for me, or break apart just my second number. The last strategy that we'll go over today is making 10. And the way that we do making 10, when we were doing addition, it's similar to that. So you have to just look at the ones place to see what you would do to make 10. And when we were doing addition, it didn't matter which number you looked at, but when we're doing subtraction, I want you to look at the second number that you're subtracting. So I'm always going to try and make that into a group of 10. And then the other key thing to remember is that whatever I do to this number, I have to also do to that number. Otherwise, the math's not going to work out. So looking at this example, 66 minus 15, if I look at 15, I want to ask myself, what do I need to do to that number to get to the next group of 10? And so I know that I would need 5 more. So I'm going to add 5 to the 15, and I would get 20 to a nice friendly number. But I have to, if I'm doing that to this number that I'm subtracting, then I also need to do it to my first number too. So 66, I'm going to also add 5 to, which would make it 71. So now I added 5 to both of my numbers in that number sentence so that it balances out. I added the same amount to both of those, so then my difference, or the answer when I'm subtracting, should be the same in the end. So if I take 71 minus 20, I don't have to do anything to the ones. I just subtract the tens, which would leave it as 51. So we got the same difference as when we used our break apart strategies. We just did it a different way. Really important that you remember to whatever I do to the first number, I need to do to the other number as well. Otherwise, this won't work out. So I want you to get a whiteboard and marker. Pause your video to go get those materials, and then I want you to practice doing these different strategies with me. So the first strategy, once you get your materials, is going to be breaking apart both numbers. So I'm going to draw a line down my screen just so I can have space for both. So pause the video and see what you would do to separate both of those. 72, what that would become, and what 16 would become. So we know that 72 is going to become 70 and 2, and then 16 is going to become 10 and 6. Now, as I'm doing this strategy, I'm going to discover that some of these work better for others, for certain problems, and some work better for others. So for example, this one, I have to remember that 72 is my number I'm starting with, so I'm subtracting the 16 from that. So if I broke these apart, and I know that I have 2, I can't take 6 away from 2, so I'm going to have to borrow a 10 to make that 60, and I'm going to give that 10 to the 2 so that it becomes 12. So I'd take 12 minus 6 is 6, and then 60 minus 10, 60 minus 10 is 50. So since I broke them apart, I need to put them back together, which means that's 56. Okay, now let's try it where I just break apart the other number, just one of the numbers. So looking at this one, I'm not going to change my first number. If I'm breaking apart just one of my numbers, I'm always going to break apart that second number, the number that I'm subtracting, which would be 16. So 72 stays the same. 16 breaks apart into what two numbers? It should be a 10 and a 6. So think about the next step that I would take and try it out on your board. So next I'm going to take my 10s or my 1s and I'm going to subtract them. So I'm going to think about 72. I always like to start with my 1s just in case I have to borrow. 72 minus 6. Then I'm going to subtract those. And if you need to use some sort of strategy for that, hopefully you can do it in your head. So 72 minus 6, if I count backwards, 72, 71, 70, 69, 68, 67, 66. Then I still have my 10. So then I'd figure out what 66 minus 10 is. 66 minus 10 is going to be 56. So again, I get either one of those. I get 56. Depends on what strategy works best for me. Those strategies were kind of difficult just because it didn't have a larger ones place to subtract from. And so this is a good example of when you might want to use making a 10 or adjusting our numbers to help with subtraction. So in this case, again, remember, I'm going to try and make the number that I'm subtracting into a good, friendly, round number of a group of 10. That way it's super easy for me to subtract. So thinking about I have 16, what number would I need to add to 16 to make it a friendly number, the next group of 10? Right, it should be 4. So I would be adding 4. Now remember, whatever I do to this number, I have to do to the other number. So I'm also adding 4 to the 72. So that means that 16 is now 20, and 72 is now 76. So I added 4 to those so that it's a nice even number. Now that makes it easy for me. I know that 76 minus 20 is 56. I can do that in my head. So in this case, this strategy was probably the easiest one just because of the way that it worked out. That's the way I see it. You might use a different strategy and might think a different one's easier for you. All right, now I want you to try this one. We have 81 minus 17. So looking at that one, thinking about which strategy might be best for you and trying it out. Pause the video and solve it using mental math. Then you can press play to see how I would do it with those different strategies. So this is another example of another one where the ones place in my number I'm starting with is smaller than the ones place in the number I'm subtracting. And so that makes it a little bit more difficult for those break apart strategies. So my go-to when that happens is that making 10 or making a friendly number because that makes it a lot easier on me. That's just the way it works best for my brain. So I'm going to start with that one. So remember, I'm checking that second number and trying to make it into a group of 10. So 17, I know I need 3 more, so I'm going to add 3 to make it into 20. Then whatever I do to that number, I have to do to the other one. So I'm going to add 3 to 81, making it 84. 84 minus 20 is 64. If you chose to do the other strategies of breaking apart both of them, I would have 80 and 1, and then I would be subtracting 10 and 7. So again, if you did this way, you're going to have to do some borrowing because I can't take 7 away from 1. If I have 1 cookie, I can't eat 7 no matter how hungry I am. So I'm going to take a group of 10 away from the 80, making it 70. Giving that group of 10 over to my ones. So it'd be 11. Then I'm going to subtract. 11 minus 7 is 4. 70 minus 10 is 60. Since I broke them apart, I have to put them back together, making that 64. So coming out with the same difference, just doing it a different way. The last strategy you might use using one of these 3 we're focusing on today would be breaking apart just that second number of 17. Sorry about that circle. That's not a very great circle. So I'm keeping 81. Then I'm going to subtract. I know 17 can break apart into 10 and 7. And it doesn't matter what order you subtract them in. I usually like to start with the ones just because. So I do 81 minus 7. If I don't know that off the top of my head, I might have to count backwards. You might know it off the top of your head, and that's right too. I'm going to count backwards just to model what that sounds like. 81, 80, 79, 78, 76, 75, 74, 73. So I would have 73. Oh, I'm sorry, it would be 74. Making sure we're always checking our work. Sometimes I make mistakes too. Then you need to subtract your 10 still. So 74 minus 10 is 64. So again, taking your time, seeing which one is the easiest. Noticing I made a mistake on this one, that this wasn't a very good strategy for me for this one. When it works better for others. So again, use whatever strategy works best for you. As you look at your work today, if you're choosing the paper option, you'll notice that there are a lot of different practice options for you to do today. It's not as confusing as yesterday's, so hopefully that will be a little bit easier on you to be able to do, and you can choose whatever strategy you want that works best for you for mental math. The only thing you can't do is look off of somebody else's paper or use a calculator.